Today we're going to do a crash course on PySide6, which means we're going to learn how to develop professional and modern graphical user interface applications in Python using the Qt6 framework behind the scenes. Now there's also a second Python package called PyQt6, and maybe you're asking yourself which one to use in order to develop GUI applications with Qt6 and Python. And the answer is it doesn't really matter. You can learn both, and then you also know how to use the other one. So if you learn PySide6, you also know how to use PyQt6 and vice versa. The changes or the differences are not that large. The only difference is in licensing. So maybe you want to take a look at both licenses. The PyQt6 license seems to be a little bit more problematic or restrictive. So take a look at that if you want to decide to use one over the other. But in this video today, we're going to learn about PySide6 and how to develop GUI applications in Python by using it. So let us get right into it. Alright, so let us get started. My goal with this crash course today is, as always when I do a crash course, to cover as much as possible in a short amount of time. Because of that, of course, we're not going to have a complete guide that covers every single component that PySide6 has to offer or that Qt has to offer. I'm just going to get you started with the package so you know how it works, you know how to use it, you know how to build applications, and then you can go deeper on your own and explore more exotic components that you want to add to your applications. Because of that, I want to refer you right away to the documentation. So if there is something that you want to use, if there is something that you're interested in that I don't cover in this video, you can just go to this documentation. You will find a link to it in the description down below. You can go to Modules API, then click on Qt modules supported by Qt for Python. And here you can see all sorts of different modules. And the important thing, the most important thing, I guess, is Qt widgets, because here you can see all UI components. You have stuff like layouts, you have buttons, you have boxes, checkboxes, combo boxes, different dialogues, frames, and all sorts of things here that can be interesting to you. So if there is something that I don't cover in this video, for example, let's go with something like a table view. I'm not sure if I'm going to cover a table view. Here you can see how it works. Here you can see what it is about and how to use it. So if there's something you want to go into that I don't cover, just refer to the documentation. Having said that, I'm going to cover quite a bit in this video today. The goal is to start with a very basic Hello World application to show you how to create windows, how to add components to the windows, widgets, so to say, how to also add events to the widgets, how to add actions that are taken when I click on a button, when I click on an item in a list or something like that. Also how to work with menus, how to display messages, message boxes, and also we're going to take a look at QtDesigner, so how to use a graphical user interface software to drag and drop a user interface together, how to import that into Python and then work with it so that we don't have to define the UI in code. So we're going to take a look at both approaches, and that's basically it. So let us get started with the setup of our environment. For most of you guys, it's going to be probably quite simple because you just want to use your basic Python version. Just go to a directory where you want to be working in. In my case, this is going to be the tutorial directory here. And in here now, you want to set up your environment if you want to use a virtual environment. Otherwise, if you just want to use your global Python installation, go ahead and type pip or pip3 install and then PySide6. That's all you're going to need today. If you want to use a virtual environment, I hope you know how to do it. It's just Python or Python 3-m-venv.vn, for example. You can also use virtualenv. And as always, I'm going to use UV. So for those of you who are familiar with UV, you can also use it. In my case now, this means I'm going to initialize a UV project. This is not part of PySide6, by the way. So if you don't understand this, don't care about this, there's no reason to use UV unless you want to use UV. So in my case, I'm initializing the project and I'm going to say UV add PySide6. That's how I do it. Again, you just have to say pip3 install PySide6. Same effect. What I'm also briefly going to do in order to not have any problems with my auto completion is I'm going to activate the virtual environment by saying source venv bin activate. And then I'm going to open up a main py file. I'm going to make it empty so there's no code in there. And now we can build a very basic minimalistic Hello World application to familiarize ourselves with the PySide6 way of doing things. So we're going to start by saying from PySide6.QtWidgets, this is the module that we looked at in the documentation. Here we can now get the UI elements that we're interested in. For example, QApplication is the application itself. This is like not necessarily the window, but an application, the overall thing that is running. then also a Q main window, which is the actual window that is part of the application. And then we're going to start with a very simple component, the label. So Q label is just some text that is being displayed. In addition to that, we're also going to say from PySide6.QtCore import Qt. We're going to use that to align the label into the center. So very, very basic styling here. And then we're going to start to define our application or our main window as a class. So I'm going to say here class main window is going to inherit from Q main window, and I'm going to have a simple init method, so a constructor where I'm going to pass just a self keyword. I'm going to call the super constructor, so super underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and now we can add UI elements to this window, and we can also decide on the window title and set the size and so on. For example, I can say self, since this is a window, so self.set window title is going to allow me to have a specific title for this application. For example, let's call it Hello World application. I could also theoretically set a size, so I could do something like self.set fixed size and then pass a size. We're going to do that later on to see the difference. For now, I'm just going to leave it to the default value. And then we can say label is equal to Q label, and I can provide some text. Of course, we're going to say Hello World here. And then what I want to do with this label is I want to align it into the center. So I'm going to say label.setAlignment. And this is what we imported Qt for, Qt align center. This is just a constant, so to say, or a setting that tells us, okay, this label has to be centered, not left aligned, for example. And finally, since we only have a single widget, we can keep it simple and say self.setCentral widget label. Since we don't have anything else, we're not going to use layouts or anything. We just say the label is the central widget of this application. I need nothing else. That is my application. So having defined this class, we just say app is equal to Q application. Then we say window is equal to main window. Then we say window.show, and then we say app.exec. So execute the application. This is the most basic. I mean, the most basic would probably be without the alignment, but this is a very, very minimalistic, basic example of using PySide6. Now, before I run this, I need to warn you about how this is going to be displayed on my system. I am using a tiling window manager, so I'm not going to get the windows as floating windows unless I deliberately set them to floating mode. So don't be confused by the way it looks on my system. You can run it on your own system. You're going to see the basic bar with minimize and maximize and X and the title and so on at the top. I'm not going to see that because I'm using i3, a tiling window manager. But when I run this, you can see I get this here in split mode. I can also detach this to make this a floating window. So now I have this thing here. This is the window. I don't have the bar at the top, but I can see the title down here. This is just my setup. Again, if you run this on your system, you're going to have a normal window like every other window, and you're going to see Hello World. So that is the most basic way to create an application with PySide6. Now the question is, how do I do that if I have multiple elements? Because I called here now set central widget. This only works for a single element. How can I add, for example, 4 different labels? Let's keep it at labels to not be confused right away. How do I add 4 different labels to the same application, to the same window? Now we need 2 things for that. One is a layout, so a way in which these elements are going to be structured, and then we also need a container to place all these labels or all these elements into. So what we're going to do here first is I'm going to import QWidget, which is just the widget itself, so a container, and into this widget I'm going to place different labels, multiple labels, and I'm going to have a layout that defines how this is done, in what order this is done. And to see how this works, I'm going to say now here container is equal to QWidgets. Then I'm also going to import one of the layouts, which is the QVBox layout, so vertical box layout. Then I'm going to take this call to set the central widget. I'm going to set it to container. So the container is now my central widget. And then I'm going to say I want to have not just one label. I want to have a label 1 called, let's say, 1. I want to keep the alignment center, so maybe let's also take a blank line. Let's paste this 3 times. Let's say label 2, label 3, label 4, and then we can change that to 2, We can change that to 3 and that to 4. And now what we need to do is we need to take the container, add a layout to that container, and then add the labels to the layout. So we're going to say here, layout is equal to QVBox layout, which is applied to the container. And down here, we're just going to say now, layout.add widget label 1. Then I'm going to copy that, and we're going to do this for all 4 labels. That is basically it. And when I run this, you can see that these 4 labels here are stacked on top of each other vertically. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we change the layout that we use to something else, for example, if I don't go with QVBox layout, but QHBox layout, so horizontal box layout, then of course they're going to be placed side by side. So if I change that here and run this, you can see I get the same elements, but I get them from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are the 2 basic box layouts. We also have something called a grid layout. So we can change that here to QGrid layout. And this allows us, as the name already says, to place the items in a grid. So we have label 1, 2, 3, 4. And the only thing that is now different is I have to specify the indices here of the grid placement when I use the add widget function. So I have to say 0, 0, for example, 0, 1, and then I could do 1, 0, and 1, 1. And what this basically does is it's the upper left, the upper right, the lower left, and the lower right. So it is basically row 0, which is the first row, then column 0, which is the first column, and then we have here first row, second column, second row, first column, second row, second column. So if I run this, you can see that I get a problem because I'm not using the correct layout. I have to change this to grid layout, but then I get this view, 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are the 3 most important layouts. There's also a stacked layout, which we're not going to cover. It's basically stacking the items on top of one another on the z-axis, so on the depth axis. We're just going to skip this because I don't think that you're going to use this anytime soon. If you want to use that, you can look up the documentation. But these are the 3 most important layouts: the vertical box, the horizontal box, and the grid layout. So let us now take a look at different widget types. For this, I'm going to go with a VBox layout again to just have everything on top of one another. So I'm going to say here VBox layout container. I'm going to delete all these labels here except for the first one. And then I'm going to also delete the one here. I'm going to just call this label, or I'm going to just show label here. And here I'm just going to say layout add widget label. So we just have a single label again. If I run this, you can see we just have label, and that's basically it. And now let us add different components. So I'm going to go here to Qt widgets, and we can import different widgets, like for example, the Q push button, the Q line edit, the Q text edit, the Q slide bar or slider, the Q progress bar, the Q combo box, the Q list widget, Q radio button, and so on. So whatever you want to play around with, you can just import it. And if I didn't cover it here, you can look up the documentation. I just want to show you a couple of these so you get the idea of how to work with different components, and then you can just use the ones that you're interested in. So let us get started with a button. The button is just a Q push button. I also define the text of the button here in the constructor. So I can say click me, for example. Of course, we also need to add the button. So we're going to say here add widget button. And when I run this now, you can see that I have a label and a button that I can click without any functionality. Again, this is going to be covered next, but that is another UI component. Same thing, I can say here now, line edit is equal to Q line edit. We don't need any text here. I can also do the same thing with text edit, Q text edit, which is a text area. Then I can just add these 2 things. So line, not license, line edit, and text edit. Run this, and now we can see we have label, button, line edit, text edit, where I can have multiple rows. Of course, we also have some components where we need to specify more things. For example, a combo box would be a Q combo box, and I would have to add items to the combo box. For example, I can say here combo box.add items, and then I would just have to pass a list of options here. For example, 1, 2, and 3. And when I add this, you will see combo box. There you go. Now you can see we have this drop down menu, essentially 1, 2, 3, where I can select an item. Of course, all of these things that we can do here, changing the text, clicking a button, changing the selection here, all of these are events that can be captured and then we can react to them. So I can, for example, write a function that prints to the command line, selection changed, now it's 2. And when I click on this, it will change the selection and show the message. Same with a button click. All of these are essentially events. The same thing can be done here with the list widget. So I can just say list widget is equal to Q list widget. And then I can just copy this add items call. I can just replace combo box with list widget. Then I add it also to layout. And then you can see if I run this, we have here the list widget where I can select items with a single click, or also I can double click them. These are different events, so I can capture the different events. I can have a function that reacts to a single click, and I can have a function that reacts to a double click. We're gonna see how this works in a second here. Then we also have some classic stuff like checkboxes and radio buttons. So I can say checkbox 1 is equal to Q check. Actually, I didn't import it. So Q checkbox. And I can give it some value like 1 again. Let's try that. Then I can copy that, do a couple more checkboxes here, and then I can say 2 and 3. Of course, what I can also do is I can add a container within a container and say, for example, these 3 checkboxes belong to the second container, to the inner container. This inner container has a horizontal box layout, so I would have the vertical box. Actually, instead of just explaining this, let me do that to show you how this works. So we could do a QH box layout. I can say something like inner container is equal to Q widget. Then I could say inner layout is equal to a QH box layout, and this is part of the inner container. And then I could say that the inner layout here, I want to add the widget checkbox 1. I can copy that, increase the number here, and then in the end I could just add this inner container as a widget. And when I run this now, you can see I have this as a separate container here, and I have these listed horizontally. Now I can do the same things also, or the same thing also with radio buttons. So I can go and replace that here with radio 1, radio 2, radio 3, and then of course I would have to replace that here with a Q radio button. I can do that here as well, and now I could run that, and I don't have that because here I'm using still checkbox radio 1. Let's do that, and if I now press the buttons, you can see I can only select a single one. That's what a radio button is for. I can only have one of them selected at the same time. And yeah, that's basically the idea. I don't want to bore you with too many UI components. Maybe one more. Let's use a slider, a Q slider. Let's just add that as a widget as well. And that's essentially the idea. You add components, you choose layouts within layouts to have a well-structured application. And then what you do is you just interact with the UI components. So this was the wrong button. There you go. I can have a slider here, as you can see. Now for the slider, I can also set up certain other things. For example, I can say I don't want to have a vertical slider. I can say the slider should be qt.horizontal. And I could also say set range to have a value range from 0 to 100, for example. And when I run this now, you can see I have a slider down here. Now we cannot see the value range, but it would be important or relevant if we catch the event of slider value changed. Then I can see, okay, this is a value, for example, here something like 40, 48 or something. That is the idea. Again, I don't want to waste too much time going through all the different UI components. I just wanted to show you the basic idea. Each component has different settings. For combo box and list widget, you have to add items. For the slider, you set the range and so on. Depending on what you're using, you will have to set up different things. But the idea is you just add them as widgets to your layouts. So let us now get to the interesting part, which is adding functionality to the UI components. For this, I'm going to delete some of them. I'm going to delete, for example, the line edits and the combo box. I'm going to keep the list widget. I'm going to keep the button. I'm going to keep also the radio buttons here. And I'm going to remove the slider. So we're going to get rid of the line edit, text edit, combo box, and slider. The rest should stay the same. We still have these components here. And now we're going to react to the click. So clicking the button should do something. Clicking on these items should do something. Double clicking on the items should do something. And changing the selection of the radio buttons should also do something. Now, what it does exactly depends on your application. I'm going to keep it simple here and just print stuff to the command line. You can, of course, also do something more sophisticated, like do some, I don't know, load some data or change something about the UI. I just want to show you where to connect a function, and what you do in that function is up to you. So let us get started with the most simple example, which is a button click. How do I connect a functionality to a button? I say button.clicked, which is the event, .connect. And in here, I pass a function. So I can either refer to a function. If I have a function down here, let's say def do something. Then of course, what I could do here is I could print some stuff, and what I can do then in the connect function here is I could pass that as an entity, but I can also just add a lambda expression. So I can also just say here lambda, we don't have any input. I just want to print button clicked to the command line. So button clicked like this. This basically is a function. It's an anonymous function, a lambda function, lambda expression. And it's treated like any normal function. We just click the button, it calls this function and prints button clicked. So I can run this. And now when I click the button, you can see in the command line button clicked. That is the most simple way to add functionality to a button. And essentially nothing changes when it comes to other UI elements. You just have to listen to the proper events. For example, what I want to do here now is I want to add a function, let's say radio changed, to do it in a different way. And what I want to do here now is for each button, when it changes the state, I want to see if the button is selected or not, because of course the button can also change the state by being unselected because another one was selected. So I'm going to say I want to get the radio button that sent this particular event. I'm going to say this is the sender of the event, so self.sender. And then I want to say if r.isChecked, then I want to print a message. Then I want to print that radio button was selected, value, and then I can say r.text. So that basically gets the name of the radio button, so this 1, 2, 3 text that it has, and it prints that if this one was selected when something changed. So what I could do now here is I would have to listen to a different event, which is the change or the toggled event. And how I do that is I would say for r in, and now I can just add this as a tuple here, radio 1, radio 2, radio 3. And I can say r.toggled. So that is the event here, not clicked, but toggled, connect, and I can connect this self.radio changed function. Now important, we don't call the function like this, we just pass the function as an entity so it can be called when necessary. So I can run this and you can see radio button was selected, value 1, value 2, value 3. If I just click the same button, nothing happens. But if I change the selection, you can see I always get a message with the changed button. Now I'm not sure if there's a clicked event also, so maybe we can see if there is a clicked event for the radio button. In this case, we would get, yeah, there you go. In this case, we would get a message every time we click on a button. So that would be a different event to listen to. It would also work, but a different functionality. So we want to listen to toggles. And we can do the same thing now also with the list widget. What we would listen to here is we would listen to item clicks. So I could go down here and say list widget dot item clicked dot connect, and I could connect that to a lambda expression again to keep it simple, lambda, and I could just say print item clicked, and maybe let's use a formatted string here to keep it professional, item clicked, and it would be, actually I need an input for that, this would be the item, so lambda item, item clicked, and I'm interested in item dot text. So I can run this, and now when I click on the item, you can see item clicked 1, 2, 3. Also, if I click multiple times on the same item, I get this printed event. Now, as you saw, there's also a second event, which is item double clicked, which could be interesting. For example, you want to click on an item, nothing happens, but when you double click, you want to open a window with more information or something. In this case, we could do something like item double clicked. And then when I run this, if I just do a single click, nothing happens. But if I double click on one, you can see I get the double click. There you go. This is how you work with events. Again, there's much room for different approaches here. You basically have an UI element, you have events that you can listen to, you connect these, and then you just connect them to a function that is either defined inline here like a lambda expression, but more likely you're going to use something like this, where you define a complex function like opening a new window or closing the application or connecting to a database or something. But you do that as a reaction of an event which is clicked, item double clicked, toggled, or anything else. Now let us move on to something completely different, which is the menu bar of the item. We want to add a menu with file, help, edit, or whatever at the top, and we want to add some functionality there. So let me remove everything here. Let me also remove basically all the imports except for application and main window. And now what we can do is we can access the menu bar of the main window and we can add items to the menu bar. So we don't even need a central widget. I can just get rid of all that. And we're going to say now that the menu bar is, we don't even need to import QMenuBar for that. We can just access the menu bar of the QMainWindow object by saying self.menubar like this. This is going to give us the instance of the menu bar. And now what we can do is we can add menus to the menu bar. So I can say, for example, file menu, or actually to keep the convention here, let's go with that. File menu like this is equal to menu bar dot add menu. And we can add some text here like file, and then I can do the same thing for, let's do edit, and then I can do something like help menu, and we could do here edit, and we could do here question mark. And of course, for each of these menus, I can also add submenus, and I can also add actions. So for example, let's just say submenu is equal to file menu dot add menu. I can just call it submenu. And let's say in the submenu, I want to have an action. So submenu dot add action should be exit, for example. And then I can connect this action to an actual event, or I can connect the function to an actual event of this action. So for example, I can say, I of course need the action for that. So exit action is equal to that. Then I can say exit action dot triggered. This is the event here, connect. And then I could just say exit. Like that. This would exit the application. Or a more Qt-like way to do that would be to say self.close. Also an option. So I can run this now, and you can see I have this menu, file, edit, question mark. I don't have any items here, but here I have the submenu, and here I have an item or an action, exit. If I click it, the application ends. So I can also say, for example, to the help menu now, help action is equal, or maybe let's do about action is equal to help menu dot add action, and let's say I want to call this about, and when someone triggers about, like about action is triggered, then I want to print something, so I can do a lambda expression again where I just print this is a tutorial GUI app. So I can run this now, I can click on question mark about, this is a tutorial GUI app. That is how you work with menus. Now, of course, displaying messages in the command line is not something that we want to do in a graphical user interface application, so we can also work with message boxes. Let me get rid of all this here. Let me bring back the Q push button, and let me also import now the Q message box. So let us take the most basic example. I want to have a button, a Q push button, and this button should just show some message. So I will say that this is my button. I will also make it the central widget of the application. So I'm going to say self.set central widget is this button. And this button should have the functionality that when I press it, I want to see a message box with an informational message. So I want to say here button.clicked.connect. And I'm going to use a lambda expression for that. I just want to say QMessageBox.information. I'm going to pass self. I'm going to pass the title, so info, and I'm going to say hello world. That would be that. And I think this should work already. No, we don't have QPushButton because it's not self.QPushButton, it's QPushButton. There you go. Now I have this message button here. So let me again make this smaller. If I press this, you can see I get this informational message, hello world. I can do that again, and you can see I get this dialog. That is the most simple way to display a message, but we can also do something more complicated. We can have proper dialogues with choices, and then we can react to these choices. So for example, instead of printing an informational message, I could ask a question that can be answered with yes or no. So how I would do that is I would link to a function where I handle the dialog. I could say here self.ask yes, no, for example, and then I could define a function down here, which is called ask yes, no, and take self as a parameter. And here would just spawn a message box, and I would react to the response. So I would say if, because the message box itself will already have a return value depending on what the user presses, I can say QMessageBox.question. And in here again, I have self, I have the title, like question, for example, and I would say something like, do you like Python? Question mark. And if the answer to that is yes, then we can react to that by, for example, printing something. Again, this would be some other action like saving a file or connecting to a database or something. In this case, I would just say user likes Python. And otherwise, I would say print user does not like Python. And if I run this now and I click on this, you can see I get this question, do you like Python? If I press no, I get user does not like Python. If I press yes, user does not like Python, because of course I'm not the brightest man on the planet, because of course I cannot just say yes. It is QMessageBox.yes. So that is actually the constant. We cannot just say yes as a string. We need QMessageBox.yes. So if I run this again and I press yes, user likes Python. No, user does not like Python. But maybe a simple yes, no dialog is not enough. I want to have a choice. So for example, I can say show choices, and then I can say ask choices or something. Let's rename the function to that. And instead of having a predefined function that I can just call, I can create my own message box object, add buttons, and react to different choices. So I can say here message is equal to QMessageBox, to which we of course pass self. And then I can just say message.addButton, and I can add the button with some content. So I can say, for example, the question could be something like, what's your favorite fruit? So first of all, let's maybe say here message.set set window title is choice or something. And then I also want to say message.set text. And it could be select your favorite programming language, something like that. And here I could have Python, so add button Python, which is a QMessageBox except role. So that would be one choice that I can make, and the return value of that is the value that we can compare to. So I can say Python is equal to, then I can say CPP, and then I can say Java, for example, and I can say C++ here, I can say Java down here. And then what I would do is I would say execute the message box, and depending on what was selected, do something. For example, I can say if message.clickedButton, if that is equal to Python, to the Python object, then I can print users. Actually, I should use double quotations if I want to use a single quotation in there. So users favorite programming language is Python. Then I can say elif message.clickedButton. If that is equal to CPP, then of course do something else. Then say it's C++. And I mean, you could also do else, or you could also do elif again. But in this case, I'm just going to say user's favorite language is Java. And that's basically it. When I run this now, I can click on that. I get this dialog here with Python, C++, Java. If I press Python, I get Python. If I press C++, I get C++. If I press Java, I get Java. And that is basically how this works. This is how you can define your own dialogues. Again, something that can be much more complicated, much more sophisticated. That is like the basic way. You have a basic show information box, you have a yes, no question box, and you have something that you can define yourself. And of course, now there's much more that you can do with that, which again, you can read about in the documentation. Now, before we move on to working with QtDesigner and importing the user interface that we define in a user interface ourselves, I want to show you how to work with secondary windows, or how to spawn multiple windows in the same application. For that, what we're going to do is we're going to add a second class. So I'm going to create a class here, secondary window, which is also going to inherit from main window, so from Q main window. And basically this will work like the main window itself, but we're going to keep track of the number of windows. So we're going to increase the counter and we're going to open up multiple windows. We're going to do that by saying init self, and this time we're also going to pass n, and then I'm going to say self.set window title is window number n. And here we can do something basic, like, I don't know, self dot, or actually label is equal to Q label. And I can maybe also set this to number n here to have different content. And then we're going to say self dot set central widget label. Maybe we want to give it some alignment. Set alignment is equal to Qt dot align center. That would be that. So a very simple window. And now we can add a button to our main window that spawns this window. So I'm going to say self, or actually button, is equal to Q push button open second window, or secondary window maybe, because it doesn't have to be the second one. And then I'm going to connect a function to that button. So button.clicked.connect self.open window, and down here I'm going to define it, open window, self is the keyword here. I'm also going to set it as a central widget, so set central widget button. And of course, to be able to pass the count, I would also have to keep track of it. So let's say count is equal to 1. And now I'm going to say window, or W, is equal to secondary window passing self.count. And then I'm going to say self.count plus equals 1. And then I'm going to say w.show. That's essentially it. So I think if I didn't forget something, this should now open up a second window, which of course it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't do that is because we didn't call the super constructor. So super and then init. And what we also need to do is we need to keep track of the windows as references. So we need to say self.windows is equal to an empty list. And then I'm going to say here self.windows.append w, like that. And when I run this now, let me detach that briefly into floating mode. If I press that, you can see I get a new window. I press it again, I get a new window, number 2, number 1. Again, on my system, it looks a little bit, clunky because I don't have a floating window manager. I have a tiling window manager, but in general, you get the idea. It opens up additional windows, and when all of them are closed, then we basically get rid of them, or we close the application, and this is how you can spawn multiple windows. Now, last but not least, I want to show you how we can use QtDesigner to design the applications or the user interfaces visually with our mouse by using drag and drop, how we can then import that into Python using PySide6 and add functionality to the designed UIs. This is what we can do with QtDesigner. Now, how you get it on your system is up to you. This website here offers downloads for Windows and Mac. On Linux, it depends on your distribution. In my case here, I just had to download Qt6 tools on Arch Linux, so sudo pacman-s Qt6 tools. Depending on your operating system, you just have to Google, how do I get QtDesigner on my system? By using Qt6 tools, what I can do now is I can just run Designer 6. I'm actually going to run this from the menu, not from my command line. And Designer 6 opens up QtDesigner. So I can just open up a new project here from a main window template. I just click on Create. And then I have this environment here where I can just easily drag and drop a button, for example. like this. And I can also take, for example, do I have a line edit somewhere? I can also filter line edit. So I can just place that here. I can make it larger. I can have this button here. I can also make it the same width. I can resize the window as well. And then I can change the button, for example, to print or show message. And the idea is I want to have this application now where I can input some text here. I can press the button and then I get a message box that shows the content of this particular line edit. So to keep it simple, I'm going to just save this now. I'm going to say save and I navigate to my tutorial directory. And here I'm just going to call this, I don't know, GUI.ui, save. And then I can close QtDesigner. Again, you can do much more sophisticated stuff here. You can use all these elements. You can change all these properties and settings. I just want to show you the minimal example of how to load that and change the behavior. So let's close that. Let's go into the command line. Let's navigate to the tutorial directory. Let's make this full screen and zoom in. And now I'm going to go back to my main py file. In this same directory now, I have my user interface file. And this time we're not going to use a class because we're not going to define the user interface. We're just going to load it. So we're also only going to use application and message box because we want to spawn a message box. So Q application, Q message box, no main window because we're going to load that from the file. So from the UI file. From Qt core, I also want to import Q file. And then, most importantly, from PySide6.QtUI import QUI loader. This is going to allow us to load the user interface from the file. And what I do here now is I create a loader. So the loader is an instance of the QUI loader. I also don't want to create the window myself. I want to load it from the file. So I'm going to get rid of this line. And I'm going to say the file I want to open is a Q file. It's the GUI.ui file. I want to open it in read-only mode. So qfile.read-only like this. And then the window is going to be the result of calling loader.load this file. And then I want to say file.close. I want to show the window. I want to execute. And in this case now, this opens, I opened this twice. Okay, so let me try again. There you go. I have now this window with the line edit and with the button, but nothing works because we didn't add functionality yet. So let me close that here again. And now let's say that we want to connect the button to a functionality. Now, the important thing is you don't know what the name of the button is. The default is push button, but maybe you change that. So what you want to make sure you know is when you open up the QtDesigner again, when you open up your GUI file here, what you can see is when you click on the button, you have the object name. This is what you want to refer to in the code. So if you change that, you want to also change that in the code. So in this case now, we're just going to say here window.push button.clicked.connect. And it's going to be a simple Lambda expression where we say qMessageBox.information, window is the parent, title is message, and the content is, again, you need to look into QtDesigner. What's the object name of the line edit? By default, it's going to be line edit.text. So when I run this now, I can just type something in here, show message, and I get this as a message. So that's the most minimalistic example I can show you. This is how you load something designed in QtDesigner. Then you can access the elements like this, and you can change the behavior. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting a like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. Let me also know if you want to see tutorials or crash courses on other GUI frameworks. I have a couple of tkinter tutorials, a couple of tutorials on more exotic niche libraries that allow you to do modern user interfaces in Python. Let me know if you're interested in particular packages, if you want to have a more in-depth guide on PySide6, if you want a separate video on PyQt6, let me know in the comment section down below. Besides that, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching, see you in the next video, and bye.